Hello everyone.
Good day, everybody.
This week we are recording our conversation a little bit earlier in the week. Usually we do it more to the end of the week, but this week we're doing it a little bit earlier because we are going on a private retreat, a retreat for ourselves in the Midlands at Solitude Retreat Center, one of our favorite places. Because it's been now a while that we long to go on such a retreat. Just to become quiet, where there's no set program. One has a slow pace and there's a lot of room to meditate, to write, to walk. So it's a much slower pace during such a retreat.
Yeah, with no responsibilities in terms of the things that you have at your own house and your own home. It's very difficult to retreat, even though you have a retreat center like we do, to retreat at our own place is actually not doable.
Yeah.
There's always something that seems to take preference, and that's urgent and that needs to be done.
Yeah, so to set a few days aside and just to be quiet, we realize we have a longing, a hunger for that. And touching on the issue of retreats, I can't remember whether we've touched on retreats.
I think we have. I think
maybe
we talked about that also in connection with the basic elements like silence and
yes.
Yeah.
But just to brush up on it again, retreat is a time of slower pace, of silence, of turning inward, and almost, if we can use the phrase, wasting time with God.
I think our egos will very easily tell us that this is a waste of time.
Yes.
Because of our whole mindset of productivity that gives us our own worth, and that seems to be what God is expecting. Even, I mean, in terms of projects and all of that, you have this drive all the time. And now to take out 3 days or 4 days to just go and be, to just go and float in the presence of God seems to be a lot of time wasted with doing nothing.
It's doing something very lazy.
Yes, it's like the ego really, because we can feel guilty and all of that so quickly if we don't look back on a day and we don't have enough to show for the day.
Yes.
The ego or the critic will then tell you, oh, you've been lazy today, or you've got bills at the end of the month. All of those
so
negative self-talk.
Yeah, so this is a private retreat, a silent private retreat for about 4 days. But there are different formats of retreats. You can go on a more structured retreat where there are sessions, but still a lot of what we call white space.
Yeah, so that's also usually in a group.
Yes.
You will be joining a group or get together a group and then retreat together. Much more structured. But I think the main thing is that you will not be getting such a lot of information in this formal sessions that you have to sit and work through things.
Yes.
And so it's not knowledge based. It's not being even busy with a lot of Bible study, or it is simply just being, just surrendering responsibility. And so it's for me, and we often say it's you have a listening stance when you go on retreat, but even that for me can sometimes be a trap, in the sense of my expectation of wanting to hear something from God.
Or when I leave, or when I exit the retreat time, then I must have a message.
There must be something.
Yeah.
That must be something that's happened, which is again, in terms of that's retreating with a sense of it must be a productive retreat in the sense
Yes.
of having an end product,
Yes.
having something to show for the retreat,
Yes.
which is not the aim. I think for me the main nourishment and the value of a retreat is that giving over,
Yes.
handing over and not having responsibility and literally just floating, not necessarily hearing anything or reaching any conclusions. Might be that you are busy with a very important process of discernment, so you will be sitting with that and writing, journaling, all of that, but that it also comes from a place of total surrender of whatever it is that you are busy with.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
difficult for our egos to do that.
Very, very. Because then you realize how we are driven by results, by being productive.
Having something to show.
Yes. That gives us a sense of worth, a sense of identity. And for that reason, it is often very, very difficult if we, through circumstances, end up in a situation where we can't be productive, whether we've been ill, been in an accident, had an operation, and you can't do what you had to, or what
you used to do.
Yeah. Often we struggle with that, accepting help. Richard Rohr puts it so beautifully. He says, we have to keep in mind that we are human beings, not human doings. And to a large extent, we live as human doings.
Yeah.
But in a retreat, it's about human being in the presence of God, being in the present moment. So that is very important. But our own retreat ties in so beautifully to a question that we've received. Thank you very much for the questions. And it is interesting, that passage and the events around Moses and the burning bush, that had a lot of conversation.
Yeah, it seems to be a very rich piece.
Yes.
That's really stimulated a lot of conversation and questions. We really love the feedback on that.
So this question ties into that whole event with Moses at the bush, because we said God is calling Moses for this very challenging task of leading the Israelites out of Egypt. And Moses has all his objections, and God says, no, I'm going to do it. And last week we said it might seem as if God acts so against our innate, deep sense that God even acts against our loves. Is there contradiction? And we spoke about that. But now the question that we received is, it's fine. In general, we see a calling to go and do something very important, challenging, where we're almost out of our depth.
Yeah, where the fears would be, I'm not equipped, I'm not good enough. Those types of fears.
Yeah. But now the question is, can God also call us to a more quiet life?
Into less doing.
Yes.
And more being.
So,
and then there's also ego fears.
Of course there is.
Because we've built this identity around our projects, our working for God, and the results that we can show. And it's become to a large extent, our self-worth lies in there.
Yes.
And then to start hearing the call towards something much quieter, much less goal-orientated.
Not so much in the public eye.
Yes, and the ego then also gets scared in sense of who will I be? Will I have any worth? Um, how how will I be serving God by doing this? So there's a lot of, and it's a great question because in at this phase in one's life when one is facing maybe retirement or winding down with your career, that's a very difficult um, uh, issue to work through and to get to a conclusion. That it can also be a calling, that God can be calling you to a slower pace. Yeah,
So the question is, can God call us to a more quiet life? And the answer is yes,
definitely.
definitely. God can do that. We can answer in the affirmative because of our own experience, where the work that we do now is more inwardly focused, and it's quieter in that sense. So from personal experience, we can say yes, that
and at a slower pace.
yes,
Yeah.
that that's the one reason. But also it plays into what we see in nature. Nature isn't constantly in a productive phase. We're now in summer and we had lovely rains, and it is so green at this stage it almost hurts one's eye. So everything is growing, everything is producing fruit, and that's the part that's the productive season. But then we also move into autumn and winter, where it is much slower, turning inward, where there's more of a dying down. And that is just as valid. We need the winter time just as much as we need summer.
Yeah. Without winter, there cannot be summer.
Yes.
Actually.
Yes.
Or the other way around. I mean.
Yes.
But winter is, yeah, it's very underrated.
Yes.
Like you always tell
me. Yes.
I'm still struggling with winter.
But also, if you look at the tides of the oceans, there's a high tide when the sea is moving out, and then there's a low tide where the water is retreating almost, pulling back. And without that, the water will become stagnant.
Yeah.
There must be this. So there's a movement outwards. Of course, there must be that. We're not denying that. But just as valid is the moving inward to a more silent stance that we also witness in nature. And then you have a lot of examples in Scripture where we see where God is calling people to a more quiet life. Often when people get called for something, we read that they go into the desert. There's an inward movement, and that's important. Jesus, before he starts with a new phase in ministry, often we hear that he withdraws to a quiet place. It's necessary. We have to be careful when we use that as examples, that we say, yes, the purpose of withdrawing is so that you have enough energy to really work hard. It can be, but it is not the main focus of the withdrawing.
No.
The withdrawing in itself has value.
Yeah, because it's a stance of, I think, what we struggle most with is surrender.
Yes.
Surrendering our time that we feel is so valuable. Surrendering our need to control. So there's a lot of inner transformation and things happening in terms of you being willing to go into that space.
Yes, yes.
Where your mind and everything really gets renewed without, it's not a holiday.
No, no.
So it's not a holiday where you rest your body necessarily, although you will be resting.
Yeah.
But it's far more than that.
Yeah. And I think also the deep value of this quiet time, of being inward, whatever we do then, whatever activity, there's a depth to it. It's grounded. It comes from a deep place, because it might be that we are active then out of this quiet time in some activity, but there's depth. Otherwise,
And I
we
think
skim over things.
there might even be on a very deep level a preparation for what will be ahead of you.
Yes.
But it's not in a way of ticking boxes and saying, I have to work through this book while I'm on retreat and this and that.
Yeah.
But I think also what one must, that is in terms of having quiet periods in your life. But I think what this question was being called to a quieter, slower life, where the focus becomes one of living differently.
Yes.
And I think that's important, because that is very difficult for the ego to maneuver in terms of how does God see value? How does God see my being not busy? Is that valuable for God? Does that have worth? What does it say of my own worth? So there's a lot of issues going on in terms of calling to not just going on retreat, but living in a quieter, slower pace, at a slower pace.
Yeah. And I want to go as far as to say we need more people living at a slower pace.
And that would be willing to tackle those fears.
Yes.
Because we often think that the fears of not being able or not feeling equipped for a big task is the big things. But I think it's maybe even more of a inner growth that happens when we have to go the opposite way.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially in our culture of producing, of goals, of serving God, the picture of what it means to serve God.
Yeah. And it plays in beautifully with two other examples that I can think of in Scripture. Paul being converted on the road to Damascus. And then in Galatians 1, verse 16 and 17, we read where he tells the people in Galatia, he says, when this happened, his conversion, I did not rush out to consult with any human being, nor did I go up to Jerusalem, where the heart of the church is and all the activities were coordinated. Nor did I go up to Jerusalem to consult with those who were apostles before I was. Instead, I went away into Arabia, and later I returned to the city of Damascus. Then 3 years later, I went to Jerusalem to get to know Peter. A time of turning inward, of listening, a new phase in his life. So here's it a matter of listening before he moves out. But a very, very important period of his life. In our culture, we would say, Paul, now you have a message. You have to start as quickly as possible.
And you have some time to catch up to.
Yes. Paul, no time to waste. But for 3 years, he withdrew from activities. And then the other example that I love so much is there in Acts 8, where Philip is doing great work among the Samaritans, so much so that the people from Jerusalem come to see what is happening there. And he's at the height of a very productive life. And then we read, and God calls Philip to this road leading from Gaza, from Jerusalem to Gaza. It is a quiet road. From this highly productive life to this totally desolate spot where nothing happens. And Philip never returns to that level of activity that he had in with the Samaritans.
He goes, he stands there and he doesn't know what he's waiting for, and all of that happens, and then he's seen again in a different town, in a different place.
Yes, but a much quieter life. If you read Acts 8 and Acts 9, much quieter life. From this highly productive life to a quiet life. So God calls us to a quiet life as well.
And those fears that comes with that calling would be as important to look at as Moses' fears to the opposite end.
Yes. So thank you very much for that interesting questions, and the others. We are writing them down and we'll return to them in future talks, but thank you so much. We really enjoy that.
Have a great week, everybody.
Talk again next week. Keep well.
Goodbye.